Hi, my name is David Ebo. I work on the NewPack team, and I'm going to show you what NewPack is all about. I'm going to start by creating a new MVC3 application. I'll skip unit tests for now because we'll get back to that later. And in my app, I'd like to use both SQL CE and the new Entity Framework code-only support. And this is where NewPack starts coming into play. So first I'm going to go under Other Windows and find this Package Manager console, which is NewPack. So what we have here is basically PowerShell hosted inside Visual Studio. And if we look here, we see the URL of the NewPack feed that I'm going against. And here is the project that I'm currently working on within my solution. The first command I'd like to show you is simply list package, which will show me all the packages that are available on that feed. And if I want to install a particular package, I do add package, and I get IntelliSense here. And on the package name as well, I can say SQL, and I see that it has SQL CE and SQL.EntityFramework. This is the one I'm going to choose here. And what this did is that it installed actually 3 packages, because packages have the concept of dependencies. So the one I asked for is SQL CE Entity Framework, which itself depends both on SQL CE and Entity Framework CTP4. So I actually have 3 packages installed now. If I go look at my Solution Explorer now, on the references, I see that I have Entity Framework CTP4, as well as 2 assemblies for SQL CE. And if you're wondering where do those references come from, I can take a look at my solution folder, under which I'll find a packages subfolder, which has all the various bits. So the idea here is that all the bits live under the solution folder so they can be checked in alongside the project. One more thing worth looking at here is that not only it added assembly references, but if you look at web.config, at the end, you see a bunch of lines that are related to making SQL CE 4.0 work, which normally you would have to copy by hand from someplace. But here, simply installing the package adds those things to your web config. And looking at Solution Explorer again, we see another file that was added. And the code that's in here is basically the one line that's needed to enable SQL CE support for Entity Framework CTP4. So what I can do here is go to my global ASAX and essentially just call this method. I can do that, or if I prefer, because this file really only contains one relevant line, I can just take that line and paste it here instead. The whole idea is that this file got generated mostly as a teaching tool, because the first time you use this, you may not know how to turn on that support. So now that I have done that, I no longer need that file, and I can go ahead and simply delete it. And yet another thing that happened when I added those packages is that it created a sample model for me. The purpose here is simply to show you what an EF code-only model might look like if you haven't seen one. So again, this is more meant to be a teaching tool. Obviously, normally you would change those classes to be the particular model that you're interested in. In my case, for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to keep this sample product class, which is good enough to show off the various concepts that I want to move into later in the demo. But instead of using this DB context directly into the rest of my app, I'm going to write a simple repository pattern. And to save some time, I'm just going to paste it here. So what I have here is an iProduct repository that has the minimal interface that I need for my demo purpose. Just get products, add product, and save. And then I have an implementation of that interface over my Entity Framework context. And the implementation is just trivial, delegating onto the context. Now I'm going to create a controller for my product class. So I'll just use the add controller UI. And I'll ask to create CRUD actions as well. And here, I'm going to paste some very simple constructors here. So I have one constructor that takes my product repository interface, and then a default constructor which uses my implementation. Now I'm going to implement a couple actions. So first, the index action is going to be quite trivial. I'm just literally going to pass in repository.getProducts here. And then the create action, I'm going to paste in some basic logic. All it does here is create a product and update it from the model, and finally add it to the repository and save it. Now I need to create a couple of views, and in order to do that, I'm going to install another package called MVC Scaffold. And this is sort of a special package in the sense that it doesn't really add anything into the project, but it adds PowerShell commands to your environment. So after running this, I can now run a new command called add MVC view, which wasn't available before, and I'm telling it I want a list view, and my model type is product. And now I'll do the same for the create action. And if I look at my Solution Explorer on the views, I see those two views having been created. So they use, standard MVC pattern for validation and such. I'm actually going to rename the list view to index to match what the controller expects. And I'm now going to run this app. And here I'll go to the product controller and create a new one. Just a couple entries. And if we go back to Solution Explorer and open App Data, we see that an SDF file was created. That's a SQL CE database file, which shows that we have properly hooked up SQL CE. Back at the controller, one pattern that I'm not a big fan of is having literal strings in my code, like index here. And what I'll do to get rid of that is import the T4MVC package. And I'll show you now an alternate way of installing packages using our UI. So I can do add package reference, and here I'll put T4, and it'll find T4MVC, which I can install. And now that I have it installed, I can directly change this index to actions.index. Much better. So normally to do that, of course, you would have to manually download T4MVC and drop it into your project. Here directly you just ask to install it and it goes into the right place and everything just works. Another thing that I don't really like about my code right now is that I'm hard coding the implementation of my interface directly in my controller. So I'm simply going to get rid of this default controller here. And if I rebuild and rerun the app, not surprisingly, we get a failure because I no longer have a default constructor, so nobody knows how to instantiate this class. But this is where dependency injection comes into play. So one more time, I'm going to go to my package manager NewPack console, and I'll do add package, and I'm going to use ninject, and more specifically an MVC3 package, which includes both some special code that makes it work with MVC3 and the main ninject package. And now that I have that installed, if I go to Solution Explorer, I see that not only it added the references to ninject, but it also added some convenience code as it did earlier for SQL. And this basically shows me how to use this thing. So first I'm going to go to my global ASAX and call this method. And now I need to go in my controller to just grab the name of the interface that I care about. And back in this file, I uncomment out this example line that shows me how to do a binding in Ninject. And I'm going to say that my iProduct repository interface should be bound to my specific EF implementation of the repository. And now if I go back and try to run the app, everything works again. So what happened here is that Ninject is the one that is properly figuring out my dependency and instantiating my object. Next thing, I'd like to enable error logging in my app. So back to my UI, I'm going to ask for the Elma package. And after it's installed, we can see that not only Elma reference was added, but going into web config, we see a whole bunch of lines that were added here related to Elma that normally you would have to add by hand. And let's build the app. And here I'm purposely going to go to an unknown URL just to log a couple errors, after which I can go to elma.axd, and boom, we have Elma fully working. And another interesting thing is that if for whatever reason I decide that I no longer want Elma, I can now do remove package Elma, and it's going to basically revert everything it had done, not only remove the dependency, but clean up all the stuff it had added to web.config. Now the last thing I want to show you is how I can add unit testing to my app. So as you recall, when I created the app, I did not include a unit testing project, but here I'm going to add a library. I'll just call it my tests. And for my library, I'd like to use NUnit. So back to my console. In this case, I'm going to go through this drop down and tell it I'm now working with a different project within my solution. And now I can do add package NUnit, which is the unit testing framework I'm going to use here. And now that it's done, let's take a look at my solution. So my test solution, we see that it has now references to various NUnit related DLLs. And in addition to that, it added a sample file. I'm going to delete this class one, which I don't need, but it added this sample file that basically shows me what a test looks like in NUnit. And of course, normally you would probably delete that file and write some real tests. For the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to go ahead and use those tests. There is one that purposely passes and the other one fails. So what's really cool now is that if I go back to my console and I type NUnit, we can see that all the executables that make up NUnit are on my path. And in this case, I'm going to launch just NUnit.exe, which is the UI runner. And I'm just going to grab the full path just so I can, in the runner, open up the relevant assembly under bin debug my tests. And if I run the test, sure enough, one fails, one passes. Back to the console, if I now run the command list packages -local, we're going to see the list of all the packages that are installed in our solution, which are all the things that I went through during the demo, well, except for Elma, since we had later removed it. This concludes my demo, and hopefully it gave you a pretty good idea of the power of NuPack in terms of not only adding libraries into your projects and solution, but getting you started with using them really easily. Thank you.